arrived in Hong Kong some years ago for my unplanned gap year. I had no idea what I got myself into. I was so young. This was the first time living abroad in a country where I didn't speak the language, where I didn't know anyone, and where I was supposed to build my life from scratch. It was right after the world's worst typhoon ever that completely devastated the city. I felt exactly the same inside my heart. Trees were falling everywhere on the streets. Nothing would work as planned. I only had a starting date for my job, a 2-week plan for accommodation in a hostel in a mixed gender room, and 1 month very low budget to survive before my first salary ever. Somehow, already from the start, nothing went as planned. The taxi dropped us at the wrong address. So, in a city that was devastated by a typhoon, I had to drag my very heavy luggage through narrow, wet, humid streets for maybe half an hour until I got to the hostel. After I went for dinner, when I returned to the hostel, everyone was out, evacuated due to a fire alarm. Great, because what else do you want when you get to a new city than thinking your entire life possession have burned the first night you arrived in the city. But what was worse was the very first night when I lay down and looked at the ceiling and just wondered, have I done a huge stupid mistake moving to this new place without any idea about what was supposed to happen with my life for the next year? And the biggest realization was nobody warned me that the feeling of reinvention was not some sort of adventurous feeling. The feeling of reinvention was shock. Despite all that fear, despite not having a roadmap of my life for the following months, I knew one thing. I knew that if something goes back, there is still the option to go back. You can always go back. Of course, not always, because I didn't have the budget to buy another return flight. But I only needed to survive 1 month. And then see. Your first challenge of moving abroad isn't making new friends. It's finding a place to live. And if you're moving to one of the places that's also one of the toughest real estate markets, like Hong Kong, then you're up for a real challenge. Before I even arrived, I was looking at Google Maps. I was trying to understand the market, the apartments, looking at pictures online. Everything looked so good, but at the same time, so hard to put in context. I had no reference point, so I was trying to understand what it all meant in real life, converting Hong Kong dollars to my own currency. See, was that normal? Was I about to get ripped off? I almost was. Before I even boarded a plane, I had to escape an online scammer. It all seemed legitimate first. Documents, photos, and a sense of urgency, and something in my gut telling me something was not right. That was my first lesson. When you're new and vulnerable in a place, people will try to take advantage of you. When I arrived, I gave myself 2 weeks in a hostel. That was the deal. 2 weeks, no more. Enough time to look for accommodation in real life.
The only room that I could find was a mixed gender room. Obviously, I was anxious about many safety aspects, starting from just the idea of moving to a new city in Asia and living on my own for the first time, to the idea of living in a small room with complete strangers, including men, but contrary to all my expectations, stereotypes, and fears. That room and that experience introduced me to some of the most interesting human characters I've met in my life, and I have some of the funniest stories from that time. My first roommate, who appeared for the first night, was a middle-aged Chinese construction worker who had all his belongings in a plastic bag. The only inconvenience he created for me, apart from being a man, was that he snored so loudly I could barely sleep a wink, and I had spent the entire night texting mom to say I cannot sleep and tomorrow I go to work and I don't know what's gonna happen because the entire room was shaking. The second interesting character I met during those days was a retired flute professor who would travel from Shenzhen in the north to Hong Kong every several days during the week because rent is so expensive in Hong Kong and students are from here, so he would come to teach his flute. The funny part about him was that he was a very eccentric person. He loved walking around in the room in shiny sparkling blue underwear while explaining his passion to me. Needless to say, that made me feel a bit uncomfortable and just go crazy laughing in my head. Later in the week, two people who would become my friends finally arrived. One was a guy who worked in finance, who had just resigned for his job to travel the world, and the other one was a student who arrived in Hong Kong to study business. How do you build trust in a place you don't know? The first reaction, the natural reaction in this situation was, of course, to feel a bit afraid every night, to be a bit uncomfortable sharing the space with unfamiliar people and especially with men, going to sleep slightly on edge. However, in hindsight, I've learned so much by being open-minded, just going through the experience in itself and being out of my comfort zone in such a way. But also, talking to these people taught me a lot about how other people experience this life. The construction worker who would come for his work from tens of kilometers away with his belongings in a plastic bag, he taught me so much about humility and hard work. The eccentric professor who will still pursue his passion even when he's in his 70s, and he would openly share his passion with other people while still being so respectful. And then, of course, the guy who had resigned from finance was my first exposure to such a story, to such a courageous act of deciding, even later in life, that you want to go out there and see what truly is meant for you, even if it doesn't fit conventional success patterns. It's also interesting to talk about how my experience of safety and anxiety changed during these initial days, because when I had just arrived, my anxiety levels were here. I was so afraid of everything that could happen, of all the people that I could meet. And also, I had all my monthly wealth with me in a fanny pack in cash. I had never carried around so much cash with me, which is not that much, but it was all my possession. And every day I had to take it with me to work for about an hour bus ride. And just going out from the hotel to the bus with the mentality of an Eastern European who always think that is going to be preyed on, it was such a mental challenge. But every day I did it successfully, I became a bit less anxious and more courageous.
Another challenge people really think about when moving abroad is this: going to eat alone at a restaurant for the first time. Because doing this in Hong Kong is not like anything you've experienced before. You know you're afraid everyone will look at you, but the experience is when you're a foreigner in Hong Kong, everyone will look at you. You know, the foreigner in the local corner restaurant, I didn't know how to pick a place. I didn't know the prices, I didn't know how to order, and I could barely really understand the Chinese traditional characters. That night, I was so hungry, and the fear still kept me pacing in front of the restaurant for at least half an hour, opening the door, closing the door, opening the door, closing the door. Then someone figured out I wanted to eat there, so they opened the door and took me in. To my horror, they didn't have a table for me. They rarely have here at dinner time. So they seated me at a table with a Chinese grandpa. I looked at the menu in horror and I just randomly picked the first thing I could understand, noodles. But when they came, they were covered in chili oil sauce. For some reasons, I couldn't order something else. I was hungry, I didn't want to waste the food, I didn't want to look weak. So I ended up eating and crying because I could not handle the spice. And of course the Chinese grandpa would look at me and would laugh at me with all he had while I was pouring my tears over the red noodles. But once I finished eating, I had conquered so many of my fears all at once. Being alone, being completely outside of my comfort zone, ordering food for the first and being watched, scrutinized. Once I went out of that restaurant, I simply went to buy myself a cold bubble tea. And when I drank the first sip, I felt so empowered and grounded because somehow eating alone in front of that Chinese grandpa and facing even my inability to eat spicy food helped me to finally conquer a small footing in Hong Kong.
And I feel like this shows again how courage is not the absence of anxiety or fear, it's feeling them and at the same time deciding that you have to get out there, face it, because you have a job to get to or you have something to accomplish and you're not going to be taken over by these negative feelings. What helps is that every day you become a bit more familiar with being capable of doing something. Every day you become more familiar with your environment and you can breathe easier. The moment I knew my bus route, the moment I knew the station and where I could buy my favorite fruits from the corner lady, I finally started to feel more like home and less like an explorer of sorts.
Every day after work, I had to go and visit apartments after doing my online research. But Hong Kong apartments have this special talent of looking much bigger, much brighter than they are in reality. At some point, I thought I finally found the dream one. Bright, good location, great views. I could almost picture my new life there until the agent informed me on the day on the planned visit that he had already given my flat to someone else, which taught me the second big city lesson, which is they never wait for you. So under pressure and a bit panicked because I didn't have a place and only 7 days left in the hostel, I reached out to another lady who had just posted a listing online. And her room was small, not impressive, looking even a bit shady in the pictures. However, I was desperate and the location was quite close to my future workplace. So I set up a visit. I remember standing in front of the building before going in. I shared my live location with my family, telling them half seriously, half jokingly, if I'm not out in half an hour, someone stole my organs. It sounds dramatic now, but when you're 22 in a foreign city, about to meet someone you only met online, your imagination can get very creative about all the dangers you're going to encounter. But then I met her. She was calm, friendly, she was open for us to negotiate. There was no weird energy between us. She showed me the room. It was smaller than my bathroom back home. I'm not even exaggerating. I could practically touch both walls with my arms if I stretched enough, and there was only a bit of space next to my bed. I would spend half of my salary on that room. Half of my salary. And yet, I loved the area. The street felt alive, but it was close to work, it felt connected. So I asked her for one day to think about it. I wanted to have a thermal comparison. I wanted to see another apartment. Although, Already deep inside me, I knew that my decision had been made. Almost like with true love. Sometimes you don't choose the perfect option. Sometimes you just choose what you think can feel like home. So the next day, after I visited indeed another flat on the island, I said yes to her offer. And I think that was the first time I felt like an adult. Because for the first time in my life, I would pay for the rent from my own salary. Just me. That room was tiny and super expensive, but it bought me something much more important, much bigger than just space. It bought me ownership of my decisions, of my risks, and of my life. That's when I realized something I still believe in today. You cannot build your life waiting for the perfect conditions. Sometimes you just start in a room smaller than your old bathroom. And that's exactly where you start building your independence.
That year completely changed how I see life. In the next video, I'll share how this gap year changed me, the lessons, the mindset, and why I'm not the same person anymore.